Welcome to the annual Margaret Pittman Lecture, part of the Wednesday afternoon lecture series. I am Luigi Ferrucci, the Scientific Director of the National Institute on Aging. I'm truly excited and honored to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Linda Fried, to discuss a topic that is very close to my heart, healthy aging and optimizing the health of seniors for the benefit of society. Is the celebration of Margaret Pittman lecture, and this also requires some explanation. Margaret Pittman was a pioneer bacteriologist at NIH whose research on typhoid, cholera, and pertussis led to the development of vaccine against this disease. She also spent decades improving vaccine safety in general, a legacy that benefit clearly all of us in this time of the pandemic, and it's very, very actual. Mrs. Pittman was also the first female laboratory chief at NIH, chief of the Laboratory of Bacterial Products from 1958 to retirement in 1971. To honor her legacy as an eminent research and female trailblazer, the NIH hosts the annual lecture, which is delivered by researchers who not only exemplify the intelligence, scientific excellence, and drive of Margaret Pittman, but also has advanced and improved the career of women scientists. And clearly, we have today, with our speaker, a very good representative of these qualities. Dr. Fried has been, for me, a fundamental mentor and is one of my most dear friends. She has been the Dean of the Mailman School of Public Health at Columbia University since 2008. She's also a professor of epidemiology and medicine, DeLamar Professor of Public Health Practice, Director of the Robert Butler Columbia Aging Center, and Senior Vice President of the Columbia University Medical Center. Wow. I will have to spend 40 minutes to tell you all the accomplishments and honors that she has received in her career, and I'm not going to do that because I want to list her presentation. But I'm going to give you some little hints about how much she has accomplished. Dr. Fried has dedicated her career to the science of healthy aging and the creation of a health span to match our increased life expectancy in terms of prevention of frailty, disability, and cardiovascular disease. In this enterprise, she is a pioneer in our transition to a world where greater longevity benefit at all ages. For example, Dr. Fried is the co-designer and co-founder of the Experience Corps, a community-based senior volunteer program that places all the volunteers in public elementary school to support both the academic success of the children and the health of the volunteer as an evidence-based public health program. She has proposed the concept that it's possible to create a third demographic dividend that enables society and individuals of all ages to experience the benefit of longer lives through a life course approach to prevention and extension of health span, rethinking society as an infrastructure, as a social infrastructure. Dr. Fried received her undergraduate degree in history from the University of Wisconsin. She then received a medical degree from the Rush Medical College in Chicago, followed by a Master of Public Health from Johns Hopkins University. Dr. Fried remained at Hopkins for several years, first as a fellow, and then later as a faculty with numerous appointments between 1984 and 2008, which is when I got to know her and to work with her on several projects. Among her role at Hopkins was founding director of the Center for Aging and Health. She was also the founding principal investigator of the John Hopkins Older American Independent Center, a co-principal investigator of the NIA-funded Demography of Aging Center. It was then in 2008 that Dr. Fried accepted the much-deserved position of Dean of the Mailman School of Public Health and less Fs for New York. Her accolades are many and include the 2000 the French INSERM International Prize in Medical Research, the National Library of Medicine Award of Living Legend in Medicine, and I can attest that was fully deserved, and election to the National Academy of Medicine. In 2014, she was named as among the top 1% most influential scientific mind of the past decade by Thomson Reuters, and in 2012 by the New York Times as one of the 15 world leaders in science. The title of her talk is Creating Healthy Longevity, a basis for the third demographic dividend for society. Linda, welcome to NIH. I'm so happy, so proud that you are with us today.
So Luigi, Dr. Ferrucci, and everyone, thank you so much for that really generous introduction. And I'm very honored to be here with you today and to join in honoring Dr. Pittman, who really was a leader well ahead of our time and really somebody dedicated to creating the future of health. I want to talk to you at a big picture level about creating healthy longevity, what that could mean for us, what we're positioned to set our sights on, and what the outcomes could be, which I think is something previously unimagined, which I'm going to call a third demographic dividend for society if we accomplish healthy longevity. So let me start by saying, not quietly, that we're in the midst of a demographic revolution. Life expectancy in the US in 1900 was 47 years, life expectancy at birth. By 2010, it was 79 years. And we now have more people 65 and older alive right now than have ever previously lived across human history past the age of 65. Astounding. And lives are changing because of longevity. People will be living a third of their lives in old age and after retirement. And this year in the US, we have as many older people as children for the first time in human history. What does this mean? Well, we've added 30 years to human life expectancy at birth. For individuals, this amounts to a new life stage. For societies, this amounts to a dramatic and persisting sustained change in population structures. In 1900, 4% of the US population was 65 and older. By 2050, it will be 26%. A dramatic shift so that there are approximately equal proportions of people at different stages of the entire lifespan. How did we get here? Well, we got here through three now predictable transitions, or two predictable transitions that every country in the world just about has accomplished. A first demographic dividend of over the last 100 years through societal investments, through public health particularly, massive decreases in infant and child mortality. A response, a predictable response, is that with children surviving, the number of children per woman has declined, particularly since 1950, from 5 globally to 2.5 now, and predicted to decline to 2 in 2050. And with that, at the really leading edge is seeing that the bulge of children start surviving to adulthood. The second demographic dividend is one in which we, because of human societal investments, we are seeing persisting declines in mortality and fertility, improved survival. The population has been living longer and longer. And as I said just now, the age structure then changes with a higher proportion of people who are older. The dividend is that the labor supply, particularly of of young working age people to date exceeds the number of dependent children, potentially creating economic growth if the young working age population has jobs and an education to support the jobs of the future. Thus far, economists have said that the major dividends are what I just said in terms of labor supply and the size of a productive labor supply, and the fact that with people living longer, we accumulate lifetime savings. I'd like to propose to you that there's a lot more than that can be created as a dividend. But let's just look what's happening globally, because what I described in terms of data from the US is being echoed and experienced all over the world. This slide shows you the time required over the last 100 years for the percentage of a population 65 and older to rise from 7 to 14%. And as you can see, the time has basically 100 years for France and Sweden. The UK and the US are a little bit behind. For Japan, it's made that same transition in only 30 years. And now for a large group of countries, South Korea, China, Thailand, Brazil, and many, many more, they are making that transition in 20 to 40 years. A life-changing, but a life-changing transition which could well leave countries a little short of breath. And as it said, a transition that's happening before many of these countries become wealthy. Now, if we look globally, as the Aging Society Network, which I'm a member of, has done, a small global think tank, considering what this means for individuals and for society, we've asked, what do individuals need and want for this longer life, for our older age? And consistently across the world, the list is pretty much the same. People want health and well-being into their oldest ages, security and safety, the right environment to age in place, cohesion and connection with others, family, friends, community, and the opportunity to stay engaged for purpose, meaning, generativity, the ability to actually give back to society and leave a legacy of positive change, and the meaningful connection that's associated with that. Human beings are fairly consistent in this package of things that they look for longer lives. So a first question for us today might be, we've created these longer lives, an immense accomplishment of the 20th century. And now the question is it possible to add health to those longer years? Both for its own good and because health status during older age, it turns out, is going to be determinative of the opportunities of longevity and our aging societies. Now, what could the possible scenarios be? Let's say that this is, we're in 1990, life expectancy was 78.8 years in the US. There were a long part of life which was lived in the green, disability-free, and then a period of time in which, in the red, in which people were living disabled. Now, what would an improvement in health mean in those longer lives? Well, some of that is relational. By 2040, we hope that we will see an increase in life expectancy at birth to 82.8 years. Will that involve more years of good health, but the same number of years of disability? So a lower proportion of lifespan, but still the same amount of years of ill health. Will it involve that longer lifespan, but fewer years of ill health and disability? Or will we see an expansion of morbidity rather than a compression, and that longer lifespan, however, many more years of ill health? What this future will be critical for us as individuals and critical, of course, for societies. Now, for individuals, of course, this gap is of profound importance. Currently, we see that the remaining life and healthy life expectancy at age 65 has a big gap in it, a 9-year gap for men and for women. And if you look, this is aggregate for the whole United States, but in fact, the experience of different subsets of the population is wildly divergent. One study, which I think was really a landmark study, came out of St. Louis, in which they looked at inner city African Americans and compared their health span experience to that of white Americans living in the suburbs, and showed that in fact, inner city African Americans exposed to a life course of cumulative adversity developed clinical and subclinical disability in middle age at least 10 years before white Americans in the suburbs. So the opportunity for health span is one that is clearly an issue around health disparities. So as we think about whether it's possible to think about health into our oldest stages, it's always useful to think about why we care about it. Obviously, health is a good in itself for individuals. For societies, healthy aging would likely diminish healthcare needs and costs significantly. And if we could accomplish a health span in older age that approximates our lifespan, we could then, I would offer to you, unleash the opportunities of the longer lives that we invested in accomplishing and wanted. Why? Because older adults are, in fact, the world's only increasing natural resource with really unrecognized and certainly unrealized, profoundly important social capital at a critical mass in people who need to give back in their appropriate life stage goals, and could do so if we built a society that would empower those social capital contributions to uplift society's future, and as I'll show you in a few minutes, also become healthier through that engagement. Now, to me, this is the sentinel example of what that opportunity could be. The group, the eminent group called the Elders, founded by the man in the middle, Nelson Mandela. The Elders are now about 16 years old as a group, but you will recognize, of course, many eminent people in this founding group, which has been refreshed and replenished over the years. The Elders are a group of statespeople who have stepped down from their formal position of leading a country or a major organization, whether it's the US for Jimmy Carter or South Africa for Nelson Mandela or the WHO for Gro Harlem Brundtland. And they are unified now under the presidency of Mary Robinson, the ex-president of Ireland in the back, for good to work together to unify countries and support countries to meet forward-looking public good needs and goals. That kind of inspiration, looking at this dedicated group, which is transforming their own social capital into public good despite a formal statesperson role, can help us think about the opportunities presented by an aging society. The science now shows us that as people get older, human beings get older, it's not all about decline. There are a set of really profoundly significant assets that we acquire as we get older. Wisdom, complex problem solving and conflict solving capabilities, creativity, and emotional stability, which are not represented in this combination or to this depth or capability in younger age groups. And of course, the accumulated knowledge and expertise of a lifetime, time devoted, or that can be devoted to the future of next generations, and uniting all of that with the pro-social goals, which really strengthen as people get older. A desire to be generative, to leave the world better than one found it, a sense of generosity for others in the future, which is characteristic of older age, as well as an optimistic outlook and a sense of urgency that if things matter, we'd better get them done. This is the social capital potential of an aging society at scale. If we unleash it through two mechanisms, which I'll talk about, good health and function, as well as the social institutions needed to enable impact at scale, then the opportunities presented by an aging society could well be profound. So let's think about for a minute the social capital of older adults in an aging society. The science on social capital talks particularly about bridging and bonding social capital, the connections we have with others in our communities who are like us and not like us, which is the fabric of a cohesive society. In addition, there's strong evidence, I think, that social capital happens at a collective level when people come together for shared purpose and collective well-being. In the US currently, there are in any given day, in any given week, in any different given year, millions and millions of older adults contributing that social capital in their communities. By count, 29 million older adults volunteered in a year, contributing 3 billion hours of service to the community at large. A study by Bloom and Cutler last year showed that if you look at the contributions of the in-kind contributions of older adults to society in the US and the UK, it amounts to 7.9% of the GDP. And we know from studies that I've done that many more older adults report a desire to be engaged in these ways than actively are. And that's because of several reasons. Because of disability, more than having a chronic disease, being disabled, and because they cannot find impactful roles that value older adults and in which they could volunteer. And in addition, because most older adults are living on very limited income with minimal wealth, the cost of actually volunteering in itself can limit people's ability to contribute. Now, it's been said that old age in the United States currently is a role-less role. If we look at the social capital potential of older adults, we're leaving a lot of value on the table, value that people want to contribute. And that has led me for decades to realize that we need to create new kinds of societal roles for older adults, roles that matter for society and roles that matter to older adults to contribute in, designed in a way that can amplify an individual's impact. If we did that, we would have a win-win for everyone. If we could transform through new roles and institutions the unprecedented potential social capital of older adults into realized social capital. I'd like to just tell you about one, and I think the first model attempting to do that from an evidence-based point of view, a program called Experience Score, which, as Dr. Ferrucci said, I envisioned and then co-designed and co-built. But the principles that underpin the goals for me were to think about where the social capital of older adults could profoundly matter in society and design high impact roles that older people would want to volunteer for together. And to design into those roles ways to meet the goals of older adults themselves, their generative desires to leave the world better, ways in which to be valued and not invisible in society, and to have their worth valued as assets we never had before. and ways to build new social networks, new community, new connections for older people who lose that when they retire from their jobs. And from an evidence-based point of view, my goal was to embed in this model health promotion that can be in every community in our country or our world to decrease morbidity, decrease the major outcomes of aging, frailty, cognitive decline, and disability, and invest in every community so that we could decrease health disparities. That goal we built into the first model for Experience Corps, which is now a US-wide model in 23 US cities led under the auspices of AARP. Experience Corps is a high-intensity volunteering program in which older adults contribute at least 15 hours a week through the full school year. It was designed to shape and offer high-impact roles in public elementary schools for children in kindergarten through third grade, to improve the outcomes, the academic outcomes for their children, for those children, because if children are not succeeding by third grade, they're tracked to drop out from high school. And it was designed to utilize the assets and meet the goals of older adults, and to deploy a critical mass of older adults, enough to shift the outcomes for children in schools, enough to be a force for social benefit, to raise all boats, and enough to be able to provide a locus for new social networks and friendships. And hidden inside this is an evidence-based public health promotion program for the older adults. Experience Corps can look like this. I'll mention that the gentleman, Mr. Donald O'Carroll, who's since passed away, who's mentoring this child in reading, is wheelchair bound, living in senior housing. Experience Corps was the first thing he ever did to leave senior housing in 5 years. What's the impact of Experience Corps on children's school success? The evidence across many studies now is significant improvements in school behavior, improved academic achievement for many students, significant improvements in school climate, and significant improvements in teachers' sense of efficacy in teaching. Again, one-on-one mentoring and coaching session in an Experience Corps school. We also, through research with the National Retired Teachers Association, have shown that there is large potential through this kind of approach of bringing the social capital of older adults in to support teacher success and efficacy, improvements in teacher retention, which currently is at 50% turnover every 5 years in public schools in the US. It also, the experience of working shoulder to shoulder with older volunteers turns out to substantially improve the perceptions of older people and their contributions by the adults in the school, and anecdotally improves the understanding for children of what positive life courses look like and what they mean. Generalizing from Experience Corps, there is now a lot of evidence that community-based models could be built to create a potential win-win-win of an aging population. A win for older adults' health and well-being, which I'll tell you about in a minute, a win for the recipients, and a win for society. All of these are critical for the success of aging societies. And I will mention, of course, that interventions that support children's school success so they stay in school is essential given the role of education in healthy longevity to improving the health of the next generation of older adults and decreasing health disparities. Here's one group of volunteers, each contributing at least 15 hours a week in one public elementary school in one city in Chicago. You can see the ex-governor of Maryland, Governor O'Malley, ex-presidential candidate in the middle of the group. And you look at these people who prior to their service pretty consistently told me that they'd been home depressed with nothing to do. And you know that there's no child in that school who doesn't know that they believe that the children's success will matter and that they're there to help them succeed. So I hope I've shown you that there are more potential assets of an aging society than the second demographic dividend offers, remembering that what we now speak about for the second demographic dividend are two assets of accumulated savings over longer lives and a young workforce educated and surviving to provide a highly productive workforce. The potential assets go so far beyond that, but extending health span is critical to realizing them. If we did that and we built the social infrastructure for people to engage, there is the potential for what I have been calling a third demographic dividend, in which we build a new stage of human development in these 30 years we've added to our life expectancy, one in which the roles and responsibilities of older adults in the last third of life are designed to bring roles that utilize the assets of maturity, which are so many, and to meet the generative needs and goals of older people. And we organize this new social capital to solve the major unmet needs that confront us. And through that, build the future for next generations and create simultaneously in evidence-based models increased well-being for older people and for society. This potential for third demographic dividend, founded on a health span that approximates our lifespan in the orange and founded on the new institutions and roles we need for the roles and responsibilities of older age at scale. All of these will open up the potential of the longer lives we've created. So I have come to think about designing a new life stage to realize a third demographic dividend as basically the opportunity, the design opportunity of the 21st century. This could happen. It could be transformative in positive ways for all ages if there's adequate health. So let's think about health span. The definition, if you go to the Oxford Dictionary, is the part of a person's life during which they're generally in good health or free from chronic disease or the disabilities of aging. Health span we could think of if we can extend it so that it approximates, comes as close as possible to our longer lifespan, could be the key in the lock to the opportunities of longer lives. So I'd like to turn to where do we look to the big potential to extend health span and to say to you that there are many places to look, and in combination, they could be quite powerful. I'll start with where I left off on social engagement and social capital. So I said to you before that if people are not disabled, they want to be engaged in society. They want to be generative. They want to contribute to the future. In fact, you could think of older people as in the pay it forward stage of life. But I'll also say to you that the evidence is mounting quite strongly to say that people who can and do engage, who contribute in these ways, have better health and function. I'll give you some of the findings in brief from Experience Score. First, from the pilot randomized controlled trial that we conducted in the first 2 years of Experience Score in Baltimore, Maryland, where we have shown over many reports that Experience Score volunteers, 60 and older, into their late 80s, compared to those with a 2-year waitlist in a 2-year waitlist control group. The Experience Score volunteers reported meaningfully improved self-reported health, tremendous increases in physical activity for those who had been sedentary prior to volunteering, strengthen social networks and new friends who people could rely on, strengthened improved executive function in those who were low normal to start with, strengthened physical function, improved physical function, and decreased depressive symptoms, loneliness, isolation, and early evidence for the potential to decrease frailty. The benefits span from those with self-reported fair health to excellent health and are particularly marked for those with less financial resources, although all participants appear to be able to benefit. So why do people come to Experience Corps? As this volunteer said, it seemed a good opportunity to help out, but what do they get? Here's data from our Experience Corps randomized trial funded by the National Institute on Aging, a randomized controlled trial over 4 years in which we randomized 702 60 and older people in the community to either Experience Corps or a low activity control group, and matched 25 public elementary schools with Experience Corps to like schools in Baltimore. The exposure was 2 years of high intensity service in Experience Corps. The outcomes we have measured include physical function, cognition, and psychosocial well-being, as well as a nested brain health sub-study with brain MRI and objective physical activity measurement. The results, you can see here that the mean age of the volunteers were 67, 85% were women, 90% African American, mean mini-mental score of 28, education 43% had less than or equal to a high school education, and 29% were living on an income of less than $15,000 a year. High rates of chronic disease, such as 74% with a history of hypertension, 32% with a history of diabetes, and on average, 4,000 kcals per week expended in physical activity. I'm summarizing over many papers just to give you the high points, but what we have found and shown is that there are intervention-specific and dose-dependent benefits psychosocially in terms of people in Experience Corps compared to controls, feeling that they have achieved their generative goals to leave the world better than they found it. That their overall lifestyle activity, particularly their intellectual activity, has improved significantly, increased significantly. That particularly for women, their walking activity increased to the levels of what we might look for in an exercise trial in terms of kilocalories expended in a week. And quite significantly, that whole brain volume and memory were expanded and increased with particular benefits for men in terms of hippocampal expansion. These findings strongly support the ingoing hypothesis that this evidence-based intervention could provide health promotion benefits anchored in every community to resolve health disparities and to elevate the floor and the ceiling of the opportunity for health span in older age for everyone. But there's lots of other sources of evidence that have been mounting. I'll give you one example from Patricia Boyle in the Rush Memory and Aging Project, in which she has shown that generativity, successful engagement in generative activities that are meaningful and purposeful by older adults, has a beneficial association with disease pathology, not just a lower risk of mortality, a lower incidence of Alzheimer's and MCI and disability, but decreased macroscopic lacunar infarcts and a weakened association for those who were engaged in these generative activities between Alzheimer's pathologic changes and cognitive function, suggesting a very potent buffering potential. So what I've said to you is that there is a significant potential role for social engagement in improving health span. I'd like to conclude this by looking at other kinds of health outcomes and potential. And one is to say to you that half of all chronic diseases we now know are preventable, and that prevention of disease and disability are possible at older ages. These are the results of the last 30 to 40 years of science, and that older people benefit from physical activity and better nutrition, from healthier environments. And we also know that health disparities are the major modifiers of healthy longevity. We finally know that much of what we know for promotion of health has not yet been implemented for the full population. We do know that modifying basic cardiovascular risk factors transforms healthy life expectancy. Here, these are data from the Nurses' Health Study showing that those with 4 to 5 adverse risk factors at age 50 compared to those with no adverse risk factors have a big differential in healthy life expectancy, 8 to 11 year differential in healthy life expectancy over subsequent follow-up. And these are risk factors that in combination explain 90% of diabetes, 80% of coronary heart disease, 70% of CVD mortality, and 50% of cancer mortality. We also know that from recent natural experiments, that's what I would call it, that we're seeing the potential for health span to approximate lifespan. Ken Langer reported from 2000 to 2012 a 25% decline in dementia prevalence for all adults in the health and retirement study. Those who declined were a subset, and that was the subset that had higher education and a life course of health promoting conditions. But not everybody gets that. We also are seeing that globally. Here you see a report from Vegard Skirbeck showing that across many countries and many continents, that while cognitive age by some measures declines in terms of immediate recall, may decline with age, that there is wide differential between countries representing different kinds of contextual conditions that we now know support preservation of cognition as people get older. So societal investments in prevention via healthy environments, human capital investments, health behaviors across the whole life course are causing the segments of society that experience this to arrive at old age healthy and stay relatively healthy. But those without those cumulative advantages are accumulating ill health at middle age and are at much greater risk of disability by old age. We have many other health outcomes to target. Obviously, I just briefly summarized the ability to tackle non-communicable diseases at scale. And now we need to also think about geriatric conditions, frailty, disability, and falls. So I'll end with a couple of comments about frailty itself. And what I want to say is that frailty is a particular hallmark of aging, if you will, which results from many of the declines in physiologic systems that are aging associated. And when we cross a threshold, and I have to thank Dr. Ferrucci for this elegant slide, which she so graciously lent me, when the declines are aggregate enough, a new syndrome emerges. That syndrome is a syndrome that is observable, has a phenotype of, to be colloquial, shrinking and slowing and weakness with low activity and low energy. And when 3 or more of those are present, we see that people have worse health outcomes. And in addition, we have an insight that the dynamics of frailty are very much related to energy dysregulation. You can see that here in terms of how people present. On the right, with loss of muscle mass with aging, which leads, as you go down to the right, to declines in people's strength and their exercise tolerance, their VO2 max. If you move left, all three of those predict slowed walking speed. All of those predict the development of disability, but they also predict, all the way on the left, people cutting back on their activity. And we know that there is, even at very low levels of activity for a subset of people, of older adults, there is a mismatch between the amount of energy expended in activity and the amount taken in nutritionally, so that people have a tendency to become chronically undernourished, which feeds further loss of muscle mass and, when extreme, weight loss. This has been, we have formalized that into a phenotype that concords with that vicious cycle I just showed you, and demonstrated over the years that people with that phenotype are at very high risk of a range of very serious adverse health outcomes, worse incident falls, worsening disability, hospitalizations, mortality. The mortality rates for people who are frail at baseline here from the cardiovascular health study are very high. You can see that those who were frail 3 years later, in the bottom line, only 81% were alive, compared to, in the top line, 97% of those who were not frail. What we've learned is that frailty is a product both of basic cellular and molecular processes at the bottom, and of the dysregulation of the finely tuned interaction between our musculoskeletal system, our stress response systems, and our metabolic systems, which may become dysregulated in parallel by underlying cellular dysfunctions, but their combined dysregulation affects our ability to maintain homeostasis, affects our ability to regulate all of the systems of our body, and emerges ultimately in the phenotype at the top when it passes a certain threshold of severity. This is a nonlinear phenomenon, so that the more systems dysregulated, after a certain point, the prevalence of frailty escalates in a nonlinear way. All of this is connected to the characteristics of complex dynamical systems, which some of which are listed here, and emerge as at a threshold level where the individual emerges to function at a much lower state. What you see then is that people's capabilities to respond to stressors change as they become more and more frail. It takes longer to get better, going from left to right, given a stressor at any point. And past a certain point of frailty, it is people are in such a lower state of function with such a diminished capability to mutually regulate all of the systems of the body and maintain homeostasis that it's incompatible with life. The converse way, which I'll end on to think about this, is that frailty involves the diminution of our bounce back ability, which in fact is the point of resilience, the ability of a system to recover from a perturbation and to retain essential identity and function. And resilience, in fact, to end, is an essential component of healthy longevity, with frailty a state of seriously diminished resilience and reserves that compromises our ability to respond to stress. The implications of all of this is that the study of frailty could lay a basis for understanding what resilience really is and how it unravels with aging. And beyond that, to think, add resilience into this list of the health outcomes to accomplish healthy longevity, and think about how that consideration of resilience and social capital need to be the forerunners of changing from thinking about aging as decrements to moving to the upside of the study of aging in terms of the opportunities and the goals for a society of healthy longevity that could create a third demographic dividend. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda. That was really fantastic. And, I'm sure that all the audience have enjoyed this presentation. Before I tell you what question I have in the chat, I wanted to repeat the CME code for those that are attending, which is 37915. I will repeat 37915. I have a few questions in the chat. Susan is asking, thank you for your line of research. I find to be inspiring. Tell me what disability is. Can be quantified? My mother is 90 years old and very much engaged in society and in our family. She cannot lead of her own. Her urinary and bowel control is not good. Chronic pain. Clearly, there are levels of disability, but it seems that cognitive disability make the most difficult to contribute to society. What do you think?
So what a rich question. Thank you so much. So clearly your mother is deeply important to both her family and her community despite the limitations she experiences. Disability can be quantified in terms of those limitations, but the level of contribution that people make and the ways in which they compensate for that is a very important thing for us all to understand, because in fact, many people stay engaged and work around their disability. When I said disability limits people's ability to engage, that comes particularly from a study I did a number of years ago from a national survey fielded by the Commonwealth Fund. And in that study of older adults, a representative sample of older adults in the US, what they said was that they could stay engaged with chronic disease, but that disability was the factor that limited their engagement. Sometimes disability is hard to overcome. Sometimes people are able to create workarounds around it, but understanding how to prevent disability and how to modify it and how to give people geriatrically appropriate interventions for a long enough period of time so that they can regain as much function as possible are all critical issues for our future.
Thank you, Linda. Another question from Jeffrey. Which country do better and how? We hear about regions such as Okinawa, Sardinia, and whole country like Iceland. But are the old people there healthy or just living longer? Seems like more about luck than organization.
So, Luigi, I feel like part of this question I should turn over to you. But I'll start it off and say that there's been a lot of interest in places like Sardinia and other places characterized as blue zones, where the conditions of people's lives appear to have, over their whole life course, both been health producing and function preserving. And so there's a lot to learn from those places. Those are places where people are deeply connected to each other, where they are physically quite active into the oldest ages, where their diets appear to be quite health producing and the environment is healthful as well. So that's, I think that is a particular line of investigation, which is important to understand how we emulate that in other places as we think about how to create healthy longevity.
Thank you. There's a question about, do you think that interventions such those that you are defining on the society can reverse decline as opposed to prevent decline?
There is some evidence for the potential for reversal of chronic diseases, at least such as cardiovascular disease at certain stages of cardiovascular disease. Some evidence, for example, that diet change can really matter. Bless you.
Sorry.
Um, from a frailty point of view, I think there's potential to prevent frailty in its earlier stages, but likely there's a point at which, or from our data, it appears that there's a point in the severity of frailty when the risk, for example, of mortality escalates 24-fold when people have 5 of the 5 criteria. So I think the stage of the health problem itself matters in terms of the potential, not just to prevent, but to improve.
One last question from Christian. What do you think about the drugs that can extend longevity? Do you think we're there?
I don't believe we're there. I don't see the evidence that we're there. I think it's a hope. But I would also quote my students who say that many of them, when I ask them if they want the longer lives we've created, my students often, who are very smart, say, not if I'm going to be sick the whole time.
Linda, I have one question that when I ask you at the closing, I take this prerogative. If you had to, come up with a dream, if somebody will tell you, I can change one thing, that what do you think will be the one thing that will, get closer to the realization of those third dividend that you've been talking about? There's one intervention that can be most effective than any other.
So I'm a biomedical scientist, a population scientist. I'm going to sound like a public health person as well, and say that I think the intervention that has the most potential to drive health in older age, when people are older, is social engagement in roles that matter and are designed for health promotion simultaneously. The intervention that has the greatest potential to enable people to arrive at old age healthy, which predicts whether they stay healthy, is a public health system that uses the science of NIH scientists to deploy for prevention, health, and promotion at every age and stage of life, so that as a country, as a world, we're investing at every age in someone's health futures.
Thank you, Linda. I think that's a great final. I really enjoy your talk. I listen to you many times, but every time there is something more that I'm learning. And thank you for being so generous with your time.
Well, it's my honor to be here with so many colleagues and friends, and hopefully some new friends too. Thank you.